You know what's strange about Pompeii? After all these years, archaeologists are still finding things that make the city feel less ancient and more interrupted. Not frozen in time exactly. More like someone stepped out for a moment and never came back. A cup left near a wall. Tools still resting where they were last used. Paint clinging to a doorway that should have disappeared centuries ago. Tonight, we're not really focusing on the eruption itself. We're wandering through what centuries of excavation slowly uncovered afterward, and the oddly human feeling that lingers in the middle of it all. Here on Made for Sleep, our team builds these episodes from historical research, archaeological writing, and the quieter details that tend to get skipped over in faster documentaries. So let the rain and fire settle into the background for a while. And if you happen to still be awake later on, feel free to leave a comment about how you're doing and what time the night has reached where you are. The first archaeologists arrived with shovels and enthusiasm, not quite understanding what they'd found. By the time their great-great-grandchildren's generation put down their tools, the city had taught them something unexpected, that everyday life leaves traces worth reading, and that preservation can be more revealing than any monument. This is the story of what 3 centuries of careful digging brought back from underneath 17 feet of volcanic earth. You're walking through an empty street in 1848, early enough that the morning sun hasn't yet warmed the paving stones. The city around you has been underground for 17 centuries, and it's only been partially visible for the last 100 years. Most of it still waits beneath fields of grapevines and vegetable plots, its existence known mainly through old Roman texts that mentioned a town buried during an eruption nobody alive remembers witnessing. The archaeologists working here this decade have moved past the treasure-hunting approach of their predecessors. They've started brushing instead of shoveling, which means progress has slowed to something that would frustrate anyone expecting dramatic discoveries. The street you're standing on was unearthed 3 years ago. It runs straight and narrow between buildings whose upper floors collapsed centuries before anyone thought to dig them out. The paving stones are volcanic rock, uneven now from the weight of the earth that pressed down on them, but still clearly designed for foot traffic and the occasional cart. There are stepping stones placed at intervals across the street, raised blocks that let pedestrians cross without stepping into whatever usually flowed down the centre channel. The gaps between these stones are just wide enough for chariot wheels, which means someone planned this layout with both drainage and traffic in mind. Romans apparently enjoyed dry feet. You crouch beside one of these stepping stones and run your hand across its surface. It's worn smooth on top, the kind of polishing that only happens from thousands of footsteps over many years. There's a slight hollow in the centre where countless people stepped in roughly the same spot, probably because it offered the most stable footing. This stone has no inscription, no decoration, no attempt at grandeur. It's just a rock placed thoughtfully in a street, doing exactly what it was shaped to do, and somehow that makes it more interesting than marble statuary. The buildings on either side of this street are mostly facades at this point. Their roofs are gone, their second floors collapsed into the rooms below, their wall paintings faded or buried under debris that hasn't yet been cleared. But the ground floors remain mostly intact, and that's where the real information lives. You can see doorways, thresholds worn down in the centre from years of entry and exit, the stone grooves where wooden doors once swung on their hinges. Some doorways still have their original iron fixtures, hinges, locks, door pulls, corroded into fragile shapes, but recognisable for what they were. One house near the corner has a bronze door knocker shaped like a pine cone, still attached to the wall beside the entrance. Someone in 1790-something pried the door itself off to sell the wood, but they left the knocker, possibly because bronze was worth less than the effort of removing it properly. Inside these houses, the rooms are small and dim, their windows facing inward toward courtyards rather than outward toward the street. This design makes sense in a hot climate where you want shade and airflow, without inviting dust and noise from passing carts. The floors are often decorated with mosaics, geometric patterns mostly, black and white tiles arranged in simple borders around a central space. The fancier homes have images, dolphins, fish, decorative bowls of fruit rendered in tiny stone squares. One house near the forum has a mosaic dog near the entrance with the words Cave Carnem arranged above it. Beware of the dog. The dog looks more cheerful than threatening, tongue lolling out, tail probably wagging in the missing tiles, which suggests the owner had a sense of humour about home security. The wall paintings are what draw the most attention from visitors, though they are in rough condition. Most are faded to soft pastels, their reds gone brownish, their blues turned grey, their details obscured by centuries of dampness and chemical reactions in the volcanic soil. But you can still make out the designs. Columns painted to look three-dimensional, windows that open onto imaginary gardens, birds perched on decorative borders, theatrical masks, bowls of fruit, the occasional god or goddess looking serene and slightly bored. These aren't the dramatic frescoes of temples or public buildings. They're domestic decorations, the Roman equivalent of wallpaper chosen to make a room feel larger, brighter, more elegant than its actual dimensions allowed. You're standing in a small bedroom now, its ceiling long gone, its floor covered with a thin layer of protective sand that the archaeologists spread to prevent further damage while they work on other parts of the house. The walls here were painted deep red, or at least they were before the colour faded to rust. There's a small window high on one wall, just big enough to let in light and air without sacrificing privacy. The room would have held a bed, maybe a small table, an oil lamp on a shelf. Nothing fancy, but comfortable enough. The floor is plain concrete, which means this wasn't the master bedroom, probably a child's room, or a guest space, or quarters for a household slave. There's graffiti scratched into the plaster near the doorway, casual and crude. Marcus loves Lucia. Beneath it, in a different hand, no, he doesn't. Apparently bedroom walls have always invited commentary. Outside again, you follow the street toward what the early excavators called the Forum, a large open space surrounded by columns, with a temple at one end and what appears to be a marketplace along one side. The Forum was one of the first areas they cleared, back when the goal was to uncover impressive public buildings rather than everyday houses. They hauled out tons of volcanic debris, much of which they simply dumped elsewhere on the site, which later excavators discovered had been a terrible idea since it buried other buildings that then had to be uncovered twice. But the Forum itself is impressive in its emptiness. It's a large rectangle of open space, paved with white stones, surrounded by the stumps of columns that once held up a covered walkway. You can see where statues stood on their pedestals, though the statues themselves were carted off by early treasure hunters. The bases remain, with their dedicatory inscriptions mostly intact. Honours for local magistrates, tributes to emperors, thanks to wealthy citizens who paid for public works. The temple at the far end is dedicated to Jupiter, though it's been so thoroughly ransacked that almost nothing remains except the platform it stood on and part of the front steps. The early excavators were convinced they'd find gold or precious offerings inside, and they tore through it with shovels and crowbars, leaving behind a mess of broken marble and scattered architectural fragments. Later, archaeologists spent decades trying to figure out what the building originally looked like, piecing it together from foundation marks and comparison with other temples. Their best guess involves a lot of educated assumptions and a few outright admissions of uncertainty, which is refreshingly honest. You're walking along the covered walkway that surrounds the Forum, where shops once opened onto the public space. Most of the shops are empty now, their goods long since decayed or looted, but the counters remain, stone surfaces with circular holes cut into them, each hole deep enough to hold a large clay jar. These were taverns, food stalls, places that sold wine or prepared meals to people who didn't have kitchens at home or didn't feel like cooking. The jars would have held different foods, beans, grain, stew, whatever was on offer that day. Some of the counters still have faint stains from whatever they held, though whether that's ancient food residue or centuries of groundwater is hard to say. One shop has a painting on its back wall, still partly visible, a merchant figure holding scales with several customers waiting. It's faded almost to nothing. but you can make out enough to understand it was advertisement and decoration combined, a way to announce what the shop sold while making the space feel less bare. The painting's survival feels accidental, as if it lasted this long simply because nobody bothered to scrape it off. Beyond the forum, the streets open into residential neighbourhoods, where houses crowd together, sharing walls and courtyards, their layouts adapted to oddly shaped lots and local regulations about building heights and setbacks. These aren't mansions, they're ordinary homes for ordinary families, small, efficiently designed, with just enough decoration to feel comfortable without being extravagant. The atrium design that scholars always mention when discussing Roman houses shows up here, but in modest form. A central room with an opening in the roof, a shallow pool beneath to catch rainwater, rooms arranged around the edges. Practical, not palatial. You're standing in one of these atriums now in the house of someone whose name has been lost. The impluvium, the shallow pool, is still here, though it's been empty for 17 centuries. The marble edges are chipped, the floor cracked from the weight of volcanic debris that once filled it. But the basic design is clear. Rainwater would have fallen through the roof opening, collected in this pool, then drained through a pipe into a cistern below the floor for household use. Clever engineering, and completely dependent on regular maintenance that stopped happening the moment everyone evacuated. The rooms around the atrium are small and dim, designed to stay cool during summer heat. You can see the remains of furniture pressed into the volcanic material that filled the house. Shapes where wooden beds and tables once stood before they carbonized and disintegrated. The early excavators didn't understand what these hollow spaces meant, so they broke through them while digging and lost whatever information they might have contained. Later excavators learned to pour plaster into these voids, creating casts of objects that had disappeared centuries earlier. Furniture, doors, wooden shutters, even food. One house yielded a plaster cast of a loaf of bread, complete with the baker's stamp on top. It sits in a museum now, looking like a very old dinner roll, which somehow makes all of this more tangible than any marble sculpture could. You're walking through a bakery now, its oven still intact against one wall. They're large domed structures made of brick, with openings in front where wood was fed into the fire. The floor around the ovens is blackened from centuries of use, and you can still see where the baker stored his flour jars and kneading surfaces. There are grinding stones in the back room, large circular millstones that would have been turned by a donkey or slave, crushing grain into flour hour after hour. The whole operation was probably hot, loud, dusty and exhausting, but it provided bread for the neighbourhood, which meant it was essential. One corner of the bakery has graffiti scratched into the wall. Successus the Weaver loves Iris, innkeeper's slave girl, who doesn't care for him. Another man wrote this. Apparently Successus wasn't popular, and someone wanted to make sure he knew it. The bathhouse is 3 streets over, a public building that would have been busy most afternoons and evenings. It's larger than the houses with multiple rooms designed for different temperatures. A cold room, a warm room, a hot room, and a series of pools where people soaked, scraped themselves clean with curved metal tools, and socialised with their neighbours. The floors are raised on small brick pillars, creating a space beneath where hot air from a furnace could circulate, heating the rooms from below. This system, called a hypocaust, was standard in Roman bathhouses, and it's surprisingly sophisticated for a culture that supposedly didn't have advanced technology. The furnace room is still there, its walls blackened from years of fires, its floor covered with ash that has compressed into something almost like stone. The pools are empty now, their marble edges cracked and stained, their drains clogged with debris, but you can still see how water would have flowed from one pool to the next, maintaining different temperatures in different rooms. The hot room would have been steamy and uncomfortable for anyone not used to it, the warm room pleasant, the cold room shocking after coming from heat. People would have moved between them, scraping off sweat and dirt, rinsing, soaking, socialising with whoever else was there that day. It wasn't just about getting clean, it was a social institution, a place where neighbours met and gossip spread and business deals happened in casual conversation. There's a small exercise yard attached to the bathhouse, an open space where people could run or wrestle before bathing. The floor is plain concrete, worn smooth from years of bare feet, and there's a stone bench along one wall where spectators could sit and watch. Romans apparently enjoyed combining physical exercise with public bathing, which seems like a reasonable approach to personal hygiene and community building at the same time. You're walking through a residential garden now, one that archaeologists didn't discover until 1961, when they realised that certain empty spaces in the excavated areas had once been planted courtyards. They started taking soil samples, looking for root cavities and pollen traces, and slowly reconstructed what these gardens might have looked like. This particular garden was small and enclosed, surrounded by a colonnade with a fountain in the centre. The plants have been identified through analysis of surviving root casts and pollen. Rosemary, myrtle, ivy, laurel, fruit trees, possibly roses. Nothing exotic, just the standard Mediterranean plants that required minimal water and provided fragrance, shade, and a sense of peaceful enclosure. The garden would have been quieter than the street outside, a place to sit in the evening when the heat broke and the household relaxed. There might have been a small marble table, a few chairs, an oil lamp or two once the sun set. People would have eaten dinner here when the weather was pleasant, or simply sat and talked, enjoying the smell of herbs and the sound of water trickling from the fountain. The fountain itself was simple, a carved basin with a small spout, fed by the household's water supply. Nothing grand, but functional and attractive in a modest way. Archaeologists found wine amphorae buried near the garden walls, placed there for storage in the cool earth. The jars are empty now, their contents long since evaporated or spoiled, but they're still recognisable as storage vessels, their narrow necks designed for pouring, their handles shaped for carrying. Romans consumed a lot of wine, more than most people today would find reasonable, and they stored it in jars like these, sealed with cork and wax kept cool underground or in shaded rooms. The quality ranged from excellent to barely drinkable, depending on what you could afford and where you sourced it. This household probably had mid-range wine, decent enough for daily consumption, nothing you'd serve to impress important guests. You're standing in a workshop now, a small commercial space where someone made oil lamps. The evidence is everywhere, moulds for shaping clay lamps, stacks of finished lamps that never got sold, a kiln in the back room for firing the clay. Oil lamps were essential in a world without electric lighting, and they came in endless varieties. Plain functional designs, elaborate decorative versions with moulded scenes on top, cheap mass-produced lamps for everyday use, expensive artisan pieces for wealthy households. This workshop made the middle range, decent quality, attractive enough, affordable for most people. The lamps themselves are simple, a round body with a hole on top for adding oil, a spout where the wick emerged, a handle for carrying. The clay was moulded, fired, sometimes painted or glazed, then sold at market or through shops around the city. The workshop owner probably employed a few assistants or slaves who did most of the actual production, while he handled sales and business relationships. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady income, and someone had to make all those lamps. There's graffiti near the kiln. Lucius makes poor lamps. Apparently workplace competition was alive and well in the 1st century. You're walking past a laundry now, a fullery, as the Romans called it. This was where people brought their dirty clothes to be cleaned, since most households didn't have the space or equipment to do large-scale laundry. The fullers used urine as a cleaning agent, collecting it in public jars placed on street corners specifically for this purpose. The ammonia in aged urine helped break down oils and stains, and the fullers would stomp on the clothes in large vats of this mixture, then rinse them in clean water, dry them in the sun, and return them to their owners. The whole process smelled terrible, which is why fulleries were usually located downwind of residential areas. This particular fullery has several large basins sunk into the floor, each one big enough for a person to stand in while stomping laundry. The basins are connected by channels that allowed water to flow from one to the next, and there's a larger pool in the back where the final rinsing happened. The floor around the basins is stained and worn, and you can see grooves where feet repeatedly pressed down in the same spots. The work was hard, smelly and low status, but essential. Someone had to clean the city's clothes. Near the entrance there's a counter where customers would have dropped off and picked up their laundry. The stone surface is worn smooth from years of transactions, and there are several iron hooks on the wall behind it, probably for hanging claim tickets or tools. The business model was simple. You brought your dirty clothes, paid a fee, came back in a few days to collect them clean. Whether they were actually cleaner is debatable, given the methods involved, but at least they'd been processed. You're standing at a street intersection now, where two main roads cross and create a small open space. There's a fountain here, a public water source where people filled jars and watered animals, and probably met to gossip while performing these daily tasks. The fountain is carved from a single block of stone, its basin worn smooth from centuries of use before it was buried. Water would have flowed constantly from a spout shaped like a lion's head, supplied by the city's aqueduct system. The overflow drained through channels cut into the street, keeping the intersection from flooding. Romans were obsessed with water infrastructure in a way that seems almost modern. They built aqueducts to bring fresh water from mountain springs, created distribution systems to deliver it throughout their cities, maintained public fountains and baths, and charged fees to private households that wanted direct connections. The system was impressive and expensive, requiring constant maintenance and skilled engineers who understood hydraulics and gravity flow. When the system broke down, as it did after the eruption, the city became uninhabitable, not just because of buried buildings, but because the water supply stopped functioning. You can see one of the aqueduct channels here, exposed where archaeologists cut through a later wall to trace the water system. It's a stone-lined channel, narrow and deep, covered with flat stones to keep debris out. The interior is coated with calcium deposits from centuries of flowing water, which helps archaeologists understand how long the system operated and how well it was maintained. This particular channel supplied the fountain and several nearby buildings, part of a larger network that branched throughout the city like arteries. The gladiator barracks are 2 blocks away, a large compound where fighters trained and lived between their public appearances. The building is organised around a central courtyard with a colonnade, similar to a large house but more institutional in feel. There are small cells lining the courtyard, individual rooms barely large enough for a bed and a storage chest. Their doorways narrow, their windows minimal. The fighters lived here under guard, their movements restricted, their training rigorous and supervised. It wasn't a prison exactly, but it wasn't freedom either. The training area in the courtyard shows signs of heavy use. Weapons racks along the walls, marks in the ground where wooden posts stood for practicing strikes, a smoothed down surface from years of combat drills. The barracks also included a mess hall, storage rooms, an armoury, and quarters for the trainers and guards who managed the operation. The whole complex was designed to produce skilled fighters for the amphitheatre, and it functioned more like a military installation than a residence. Archaeologists found skeletal remains here during excavation. 18 individuals in various rooms, some wearing iron shackles, one locked in a cell that appears to have been used for punishment or isolation. The remains have been studied extensively. Bone analysis shows healed fractures consistent with combat training, muscle attachment points reveal heavy upper body development, and several skulls show evidence of traumatic injuries that healed long before death. These were professional fighters, and their bodies tell stories of violence endured and survived over years of training and performance. There's graffiti throughout the barracks, scratched into walls by fighters during their downtime. Names, tallies of victories, crew drawings, complaints about food or training conditions. One cell has Celadus, the Thracian makes the girls swoon, carved prominently near the door, which suggests at least some fighters enjoyed celebrity status despite their legal classification as slaves or condemned criminals. Another wall shows a careful record of fights won and lost, each match marked with a notch, the wins clustered proudly at the top. You're walking through a textile shop now, where someone sold cloth and finished garments. The shop is small, just a room with a counter facing the street and storage space in the back. There are no textiles left, those decayed centuries ago, but the layout makes the business clear. A display area in front where customers could see and touch fabrics, workspace behind for cutting and sewing, storage for inventory. The counter has grooves cut into it, probably for securing the edge of fabric while measuring and cutting. There are hooks on the walls, likely for hanging finished garments or bolts of cloth. The textile trade was huge in the Roman world, involving production, dyeing, finishing, and retail at various quality levels. This shop probably sold mid-range goods, everyday tunics, cloaks, household linens, maybe the occasional fancier item for special occasions. The owner might have worked alone or employed one or two assistants, depending on business volume. It was respectable work, neither prestigious nor degrading, and it provided steady income in a city where everyone needed clothes. Near the shop entrance there's a small shrine set into the wall, a lararium where the shop owner would have made daily offerings to household gods and protective spirits. The shrine is just a niche with a painted background, its images mostly faded but still partly visible. Small figures representing protective deities, a snake symbolising the household guardian spirit, offerings of fruit or flowers painted below. These shrines were standard in both homes and businesses, serving as focal points for daily religious practice that was more about habit and tradition than intense devotion. You're standing in a tavern now, one of the many that served food and drink to people who didn't cook at home. The counter faces the street, with large clay jars set into its surface for storing food. The jars are empty now, their contents long gone, but analysis of residue has identified what they once held: olives, fish sauce, chickpeas, nuts, grain, wine. The menu was probably limited and predictable, whatever could be prepared quickly from ingredients that stored well. The tavern would have been busy at meal times, with customers eating standing at the counter or sitting on benches nearby, talking and drinking and watching street traffic. The back room has a small stove and prep area where food was cooked or reheated. There are blackened stones where pots sat over fires, and a small chimney opening in the wall to vent smoke. The equipment was basic, nothing fancy, nothing permanent, but functional for the kind of simple meals taverns served. The owner probably lived in rooms above the tavern, accessible through a narrow staircase that's partly collapsed now, but still recognisable. There's a fresco on one wall of the tavern, crudely painted but cheerful. A scene showing people drinking and gambling, with a large wine amphora prominently displayed in the centre. Its advertisement and decoration combined, announcing what the establishment offered while making the space feel less bare. The style is rough but vigorous, the kind of art created by someone more interested in getting the message across than achieving technical perfection. You're walking through a doctor's house now, identifiable by the surgical instruments found during excavation. The house itself is modest, typical of professional craftspeople who made decent money but weren't wealthy. The examination room or surgery is off the atrium, a small space with good light from a window and a stone table for laying out patients. Archaeologists found bronze instruments here: scalpels, probes, forceps, hooks, all corroded but recognisable. There was also a marble mortar and pestle for grinding medicines, and several small bottles that once held ointments or drugs. Roman medicine was a mix of practical experience, inherited tradition, and philosophical theory, with results that range from surprisingly effective to actively harmful. Doctors understood basic anatomy through animal dissection and battlefield experience. They had skilled surgical techniques for setting bones and treating wounds, and they knew hundreds of plant-based remedies that actually worked. They also believed in balance in bodily humours, bloodletting for almost everything, and various treatments that modern medicine would classify as magical thinking. Still, if you needed a broken bone set or a wound stitched, a competent Roman doctor was probably your best option. The house has a small library, a room with shelves where the doctor stored medical texts on papyrus scrolls. The scrolls themselves are long gone, destroyed by moisture and time, but the room's layout and the presence of scroll containers made its purpose clear. Educated Romans valued books highly, and a doctor would have owned texts by Hippocrates, Galen and other medical authorities, using them for reference and professional credibility. Medical knowledge was passed down through written texts and direct apprenticeship, creating a tradition that valued both book learning and practical experience. There's graffiti in the doctor's garden. May whoever stole my cloak freeze in winter. Apparently theft was common enough to inspire curse inscriptions. You're standing in a wealthy home now, one of the larger residences with elaborate decorations, extensive gardens, and private bath facilities. This house covers an entire city block, its rooms organised around multiple courtyards, its walls covered with sophisticated frescoes, showing mythological scenes and architectural illusions. The floors are decorated with complex mosaics, sea creatures, hunting scenes, geometric patterns that create optical effects. This was someone's display of wealth and taste, designed to impress visitors and announce the owner's social status. The atrium here is grand, with tall columns supporting a covered walkway around its edges. The impluvium is lined with coloured marble, and there are bronze statues at the corners, or rather there were, before early excavators carted them off to museums and private collections. The rooms opening off the atrium are large and well lit, their functions suggested by their decoration. A dining room with food-related imagery, a study with painted bookcases, a bedroom with softer colours and romantic scenes. The garden beyond the atrium is extensive, with colonnades, multiple fountains, planted beds, and marble benches. This was a private park, essentially a place where the owner could stroll, entertain guests, and display exotic plants as status symbols. Archaeologists found evidence of elaborate landscaping, shaped hedges, trained vines, flower beds, even a small vineyard. Maintaining this garden would have required several full-time slaves or hired gardeners, which was part of the point, showing that you could afford to dedicate significant resources to purely aesthetic purposes. The house has its own bath complex, smaller than the public bathhouse but following the same design. Cold room, warm room, hot room, heated floors, plunge pools. Having private baths meant the owner didn't have to share facilities with commoners, which was a significant marker of wealth and status. The baths here are beautifully decorated, their walls painted with underwater scenes, their pools lined with coloured tile. They would have been heated by a furnace tended by slaves, who shoveled fuel and monitored temperatures and made sure everything functioned properly, while remaining invisible to the bathers. One room in this house has shelves with wax tablets, wooden boards coated with wax for writing temporary notes and accounts. The tablets themselves are mostly illegible now, their wax surfaces degraded, but a few preserve partial texts, household accounts, shopping lists, business correspondence, casual notes. These weren't meant to be permanent records. Important documents would have been written on papyrus or parchment, but they offer glimpses of daily administrative tasks that wealthy households dealt with constantly. You're walking through a neighbourhood of workshops and factories now, where goods were produced on a larger scale than individual craft shops could manage. There's a pottery factory here, identifiable by the kiln complex and the thousands of broken vessels scattered around the site. The kilns are large beehive-shaped structures, capable of firing dozens of pots at once, their interiors blackened from repeated firings. Near the kilns are work areas where clay was prepared, vessels shaped on wheels, handles attached, decorations added. The whole operation would have employed numerous workers, some skilled potters, some unskilled labourers who dug clay and hauled fuel and moved finished products to storage. The factory produced mostly utilitarian ware: storage jars, cooking pots, serving bowls, oil lamps. Nothing fancy, just functional pottery for everyday use, produced in quantity and sold at modest prices. There might have been some decorated pieces for customers willing to pay extra, but the bulk of production was basic tableware that people used until it broke, then replaced with identical items from the same factory. Near the pottery factory is a fish sauce production facility, basically a place where fish were fermented in large vats to create garum, the ubiquitous Roman condiment. The facility is small and would have smelled terrible when operating, but fish sauce was hugely popular and profitable, so someone was willing to run the operation despite the social stigma. The vats are still there, large stone containers with drainage systems, arranged in rows where fish and salt would have sat for months, while bacteria broke everything down into a pungent liquid. The final product was strained, bottled, and sold throughout the empire, valued for its ability to add flavour to bland foods. The smell would have been noticeable from several blocks away, which is why this facility is located at the edge of town, downwind from residential areas. Even so, neighbours probably complained regularly, and the owner probably ignored them because the profit margin was too good to abandon. Fish sauce was liquid gold in the Roman economy, and anyone who could stomach the production process literally had a lucrative business. You're standing at the city wall now, at a gate where one of the main roads enters from the countryside. The gate is large and well built, with defensive towers on either side and a heavy arch overhead. The roadway passes through in a smooth paved channel, worn down slightly from centuries of cart traffic. Outside the gate, the road continues toward other cities, connecting this town to the broader Roman network of trade and communication. The gate would have been staffed by guards who collected tolls, checked incoming goods, and generally monitored who entered and left the city. It wasn't about security in a military sense. The city wasn't expecting sieges, but about maintaining order and collecting taxes on commercial traffic. Merchants bringing goods to market would have stopped here, declared their cargo, paid whatever fee was required, then continued into the city to conduct business. Just outside the gate is a necropolis, a cemetery where the city's dead were cremated or buried. Roman law prohibited burial within city walls, so these funerary areas clustered along approach roads where they would be visible to travellers. The tombs range from simple markers to elaborate monuments, depending on the deceased's wealth and family ambitions. Some are just small stone slabs with names and dates. Others are miniature temples with carved decorations and lengthy epitaphs praising the dead person's virtues and accomplishments. One tomb has an inscription that's become locally famous among excavators. Stranger, what I have to say is brief. Stop and read. This is the unlovely tomb of a lovely woman. Her parents called her Claudia. She loved her husband with her whole heart. She bore 2 children, one of whom she left alive on earth, the other she placed beneath it. She was charming in speech, yet her conduct was appropriate. She managed the household well and spun wool. That's all. Go on your way. It's touching in its directness, avoiding flowery language in favour of simple facts about a life lived and ended. Claudia spun wool. She raised children. She died. Someone loved her enough to pay for this memorial. You're walking back into the city through an eastern gate, watching how the morning light hits the paving stones and warms the building facades. The city is still mostly empty. Excavation work hasn't started yet today, and the quiet feels almost sacred, as if you're intruding on something that should be left alone. But this is what archaeologists do. They intrude carefully, documenting everything, trying to understand what ordinary life looked like here before everyone left and the earth covered it over. The work has changed dramatically over the centuries. Early excavators treated the site like a treasure hunt, digging quickly to find valuable objects, damaging or destroying context in their rush to uncover spectacular discoveries. Later excavators adopted more careful methods: slow digging, detailed recording, analysis of everything found, even objects that seemed insignificant. Modern archaeology treats the site as a complete system where every detail matters, where the location of a broken pot might be as informative as a gold bracelet. The shift in approach has revealed things early excavators missed entirely. By studying wall paintings systematically, archaeologists discovered that most houses were redecorated regularly, with old paintings covered by new ones, creating layers that showed changing tastes over decades. By analysing plant remains, they reconstructed ancient diets and agricultural practices. By examining skeletal remains carefully, they learned about health, nutrition, disease patterns, and violence in ways that painted a more complex picture than ancient texts ever provided. You're standing in a commercial bakery now, different from the one you saw earlier, larger and more industrial. This bakery had multiple ovens, large grain storage areas, and several millstones for grinding flour. The scale suggests it supplied bread to a significant portion of the neighbourhood, operating as a wholesale producer rather than a small retail shop. The ovens here are massive, capable of baking dozens of loaves simultaneously, and the workspace is organised for efficiency. Grain storage near the millstones, flour storage near the kneading area near the ovens. The millstones are particularly interesting. They're hourglass-shaped structures made of volcanic rock, with a lower stationary stone and an upper rotating stone that ground grain between them. A wooden beam attached to the upper stone provided leverage for whoever, or whatever, turned the mill. Most bakeries use donkeys for this work, though slaves did it in smaller operations. The motion was circular and continuous, hour after hour, grinding grain into flour that became bread that fed the city. The stones here show deep wear patterns from years of use, grooves where the rock ground against itself until it needed replacement. There's a small shrine in the corner of the bakery, another lararium with faded paintings of protective deities. The bakery owner would have made daily offerings here, asking for good business, reliable flour supplies, and ovens that didn't crack during firing. The shrine is humble but maintained, suggesting genuine devotion rather than just going through motions. You're walking through a neighbourhood of insulae now, multi-storey apartment buildings where most of the city's population lived. These buildings are less well preserved than single-family homes, partly because their upper floors collapsed, and partly because archaeologists initially focused on more impressive structures. But enough remains to understand the basic design. Ground floor shops facing the street, living quarters on upper floors accessed through narrow staircases, apartments getting smaller and cheaper the higher you went. The ground floor apartments here are relatively spacious, with multiple rooms and access to courtyard light. But the upper floors, reconstructed from foundation evidence and comparison with better preserved buildings in other Roman cities, would have been cramped, dark, poorly ventilated, and dangerous. Fire was a constant risk in buildings where everyone cooked with open flames, and collapses weren't uncommon in cheaply constructed insulae. Rent was expensive despite the poor conditions, because housing demand exceeded supply in successful Roman cities. One of these apartment buildings has graffiti covering its exterior walls, layer upon layer of scratched text, election endorsements, insults, declarations of love, business advertisements, crude jokes, philosophical musings. All the goldsmiths support Gaius Julius Polybius for mayor. I made bread here. Artemitus got me pregnant. Everyone writes on this wall except me. The walls were like an ancient social media platform, where anyone with a sharp object could publish their thoughts for public consumption. You're standing in what appears to be a schoolroom, a small room off a courtyard where children received basic education. There's a raised platform where the teacher sat, benches for students, and writing materials scattered about when the room was evacuated. Roman education for common people was basic. Reading, writing, arithmetic, memorization of literary texts. Wealthier families hired private tutors, or sent children to more advanced schools, but most kids got just enough education to function in daily commerce and civic life. The room has graffiti from students. I don't want to be here. Marcus is stupid. The teacher hits too hard. Apparently school has always been school, regardless of century. Near the schoolroom is a shrine to household gods. a more elaborate version than the simple niche shrines in shops and homes. This one has painted columns framing the niche, with decorative borders and images of multiple deities. The central figure appears to be a genius loci, the protective spirit of this particular place, flanked by smaller figures representing other household gods. Below them is the inevitable painted snake, symbolising the guardian spirit that protected the household from harm. Romans made daily offerings at these shrines: bread, wine, flowers, incense, not as grand religious gestures, but as routine maintenance of relationships with divine forces that supposedly governed domestic fortune. The practice was habitual and social rather than intensely spiritual, something you did because everyone did it, because your parents had taught you, because not doing it seemed like inviting trouble. Whether people genuinely believed or just went through motions probably varied by individual, same as religious practice in any era. You're walking through a quiet residential street now, late afternoon light slanting across the paving stones, dust motes drifting in shafts of sun that angle through empty doorways. The excavation has progressed enough that you can see how neighbourhoods were organised. Commercial areas near the forum, workshops clustered by trade, wealthy homes in quieter districts, apartment buildings packed along busy streets. The layout wasn't planned by central authority, but evolved organically as people built where they could afford and where zoning regulations allowed. The city had regulations, rules about building heights, street widths, shop types, water use, enforced with varying degrees of success by local magistrates. Buildings that violated codes usually stayed standing until they collapsed or someone important complained. This created a chaotic but functional urban environment where commerce flourished. Neighbours argued over property lines and everyone made do with cramped spaces and inadequate infrastructure. You're standing at another fountain now, this one decorated with a carved dolphin spouting water. The fountain served a small neighbourhood square where several streets intersected, creating an open space that probably functioned as an informal gathering area. People would have met here while filling water jugs. Children would have played nearby while parents chatted. Street vendors would have set up temporary stalls selling snacks or small goods. It wasn't a planned civic space like the Forum, just an accident of street layout that became socially useful. The fountain basin shows centuries of wear, scratches from jars set down carelessly, chips from impacts, grooves where people rubbed their hands while waiting for vessels to fill. The stone is polished smooth around the spout where thousands of people reach to direct water flow. These were patterns or inadvertent records of daily routine, preserved in stone because stone is durable enough to remember. You're walking through a fuller's shop now, another laundry, smaller than the one you saw earlier. This one has just 2 basins for stomping clothes, plus a small vat for the initial soaking in urine and water mixture. The operation was probably family run, with household members doing the stomping and rinsing while the owner handled customer relations and business management. The work was hard and smelly, but it provided steady income for people who couldn't afford to open fancier businesses. There's a fresco in the fuller's shop showing the entire laundry process, clothes being soaked, stomped, rinsed, dried, pressed. It's a rare example of Romans depicting ordinary labour in art, which usually focused on gods, heroes, or wealthy people doing impressive things. The fuller who commissioned this painting apparently felt his work deserved documentation, or maybe he just wanted customers to understand the process and appreciate the effort involved. You're standing in a wine shop now, its counter facing the street, large clay amphoras embedded in stone to keep them stable. Wine shops were everywhere in Roman cities, selling local and imported wines at various price points. This shop has a painted menu on the wall listing prices. For 1 as, you can drink wine. For 2, you can drink the best. For 4, you can drink Falernian. Falernian was expensive wine from a prestigious region, the kind you drank to impress people or celebrate special occasions. The fact that this shop offered it suggests they served upscale customers despite the modest location. The shop's back room has empty amphoras stacked against the walls. vessels that once held wine but now sit as evidence of vanished commerce. Wine was stored and transported in these large clay jars, each one sealed with cork or clay and stamped with information about contents, origin, and vintage. The stamps are still visible on some jars: estate names, year marks, quality designations. Reading them is like browsing ancient wine labels, imagining someone choosing between options based on price, origin, or personal preference. You're walking through an area of the city that remained unexcavated until 1993, when modern techniques finally allowed archaeologists to approach it without causing damage. This section had been covered by a protective layer of soil, left deliberately in place by earlier excavators, who knew they lacked the tools to work safely. Modern archaeology brought ground-penetrating radar, advanced conservation methods, and gentler excavation techniques that could reveal fragile materials without destroying them. What they found here was ordinary. More houses, more shops, more streets, more evidence of daily life that looked remarkably similar to areas already excavated. But finding the ordinary was the point. Early excavations focused on spectacular discoveries: grand houses, precious objects, dramatic remains, which created a skewed picture of Roman life. Modern excavations deliberately target ordinary areas to understand how most people lived, not just the wealthy minority who left impressive ruins. You're standing in a small house now, one that belonged to someone of modest means, probably a shopkeeper or skilled craftsperson. The house has 4 rooms arranged around a small courtyard, minimal decoration, plain floors, simple furniture spaces. It's not impressive by any standard except one. It shows how middle-class Romans live comfortably in limited space, making do with few possessions and basic amenities. The house has running water, a pipe connection to the city's aqueduct system, which was a privilege that required paying fees but made daily life significantly easier. The kitchen here is tiny, barely large enough for one person to work. There's a brick hearth for cooking, shelves for storing pots and jars, a small window for ventilation. Most cooking was simple: boiled grains, vegetables, bread, occasional meat or fish, all seasoned heavily with herbs and fish sauce. Meals were eaten quickly, often while doing other things, with little ceremony except on special occasions. Romans generally ate breakfast and lunch lightly: bread, cheese, fruit, then had their main meal in late afternoon or early evening. The bedroom is small and dark, with space for a bed and perhaps a storage chest. People slept on wooden frames with rope or leather straps supporting mattresses stuffed with wool or straw. Wealthier families had better mattresses and more elaborate bed frames, but the basic design was universal. A raised platform to keep sleepers off the cold floor, bedding sufficient for local climate, privacy limited to closed doors and hanging curtains. You're walking through the city's amphitheatre now, not the venue itself, which is outside the excavated area, but the surrounding neighbourhood where support businesses clustered. There are taverns here that would have been busy before and after games, workshops that made gladiatorial equipment, residences for support staff, storage facilities for animals and props. The amphitheatre was a major economic driver, bringing crowds that needed food, drink, souvenirs and entertainment beyond the official events. One tavern near the amphitheatre has elaborate graffiti showing gladiators in combat, with names and fight records scratched beside them. Fans apparently kept close track of fighters' careers, celebrating victories and mourning defeats, arguing about rankings and speculating about upcoming matches. It's the ancient equivalent of sports bar culture, complete with passionate debates and loyalty to favoured competitors. You're standing in an industrial area now where workshops produce goods that required unpleasant processes or generated significant noise, smoke or smell. There's a metalworking shop here, identifiable by slag piles and crucible fragments. The shop would have been hot, loud and dangerous, with open flames for melting metal, hammers striking anvils, sparks flying from struck metal. The work required skill and strength, and it paid reasonably well because not everyone could or would do it. Near the metalworking shop is a boneworking facility, where animal bones were carved into useful objects. Pins, needles, decorative inlays, game pieces, handles for tools. The work was painstaking and the materials cheap. Bones were butchery waste, which made it profitable for anyone willing to invest the labour. The finished products sold at markets throughout the city, filling demand for small useful items that people needed but didn't want to pay much for. You're walking through a garden district now, where wealthier families built homes with extensive outdoor spaces. These gardens were status symbols and luxury amenities, places that demonstrated the owner's taste and resources while providing pleasant environments for relaxation and entertainment. The gardens varied in design but shared common elements: colonnades, fountains, plantings arranged for visual effect, sculpture or decorative features placed at focal points. One garden here has been carefully reconstructed by archaeologists who identified plant types through pollen analysis and root cavities. They replanted it with historically appropriate species: myrtle, rosemary, box hedges, fruit trees, flowering plants native to the Mediterranean. The result is a living archaeology experiment, showing what these spaces might have looked and smelled like when people actually used them. Walking through feels like time travel, not to the dramatic moment of disaster, but to ordinary afternoons when garden owners sat here, enjoying shade and fragrance and the sound of water trickling from fountains. The evening light is softer now, turning the volcanic stone golden and making the ruins look almost comfortable. Shadows lengthen across empty streets, filling doorways and courtyards with gentle darkness. The city settles into its permanent stillness, waiting for tomorrow's archaeologists to arrive with their brushes and notebooks and patient questions. You're walking toward the city's edge, where excavation thins out and buried areas remain untouched. The decision to leave portions unexcavated is deliberate. Future archaeologists will have better techniques, better questions, better ways to extract information without causing damage. Current excavators work knowing their methods will someday seem primitive, their conclusions incomplete, their interpretations partial. That's the nature of archaeology. It's a conversation that continues across generations, each one adding observations while acknowledging what they couldn't see or understand. The unexcavated areas wait under earth and vegetation, their streets and buildings intact but invisible, preserving evidence for questions nobody has thought to ask yet. Maybe future techniques will reveal information about ancient diseases, climate patterns, social networks, or daily routines in ways current methods can't detect. Maybe they'll answer questions about things we haven't noticed or considered important. The buried city is patient. It's been waiting 17 centuries. It can wait longer. You're standing at the excavation boundary now, where worked ground meets protective vegetation. Behind you, the exposed city stretches back toward the forum, its streets and buildings open to the sky, its secrets gradually revealed through centuries of careful work. Ahead, the earth continues unbroken, hiding whatever remains beneath. The excavation has taught historians that ordinary life leaves traces worth reading, that daily routines create patterns recognizable centuries later, that people in vastly different circumstances still solve similar problems with similar logic. The city preserved beneath volcanic material offers a cross-section of Roman urban life, unusually complete and undistorted by later development. Nothing here was deliberately preserved as museum piece or memorial. It's all just abandoned infrastructure, empty buildings, broken pottery and accumulated trash. But together it tells coherent stories about how people lived, worked, ate, slept, argued, traded, worshipped, and made do. The sun is setting now, its light slanting low across the ruins, catching edges and creating long shadows that make the streets look deeper than they are. The volcanic stone glows warm in this light, almost alive, holding heat from the day and releasing it slowly as evening cools the air. Dust drifts through empty doorways, catching light in golden suspension before settling back into corners and thresholds. You walk through the quiet streets one more time. your footsteps the only sound except for wind moving through empty spaces. The city around you is both utterly gone and somehow present, erased by disaster but preserved in its erasure, destroyed but somehow more knowable than most ancient places that survive through gradual change and overlay. This is what 3 centuries of excavation revealed. Not a frozen catastrophe or a dramatic ruin, but a working city caught mid-routine and slowly brought back into daylight by patient hands. The grand narrative of disaster matters less than the small narratives of daily existence. The baker who stamped his bread, the merchant who painted menus on walls, the doctor who collected surgical tools, the children who scrawled complaints about homework, the lovers who scratched names into plaster. The evening deepens. The city settles into its stillness. Somewhere above, stars appear, the same stars that ancient residents saw from these same streets, looking up between buildings at a sky unchanged by time or burial or rediscovery. You turn back toward the forum one final time, watching how twilight transforms the ruins into something almost peaceful, as if the city has made terms with its abandonment and found dignity in its preservation. The stones hold their positions, the streets maintain their geometry, the fountains wait dry and patient for water that won't return. This is where the story rests, not in dramatic conclusion but in ongoing quiet. The city and its excavators engaged in slow conversation across centuries, each layer of earth revealing another fragment of ordinary existence, each fragment adding detail to a picture that grows clearer but never quite complete. The light fades, the ruins darken, the work continues tomorrow and the day after and the day after that, each careful brushstroke bringing more life back from darkness. One small discovery at a time, patient and unhurried, like the city itself, waiting, revealing, remembering, teaching anyone willing to pay attention that ordinary life matters, that daily routine leaves traces, that careful observation across centuries can recover what seemed permanently lost. The evening star appears above the city. The first bat emerges from wherever bats hide during daylight. The temperature drops toward comfortable, and the ruins settle into their nightly stillness, holding their stories close, waiting for morning and the patient hands that will continue the slow work of bringing them back into light. "15,000 years ago, the world looked nothing like the maps you learned in school. Sea levels sat hundreds of feet lower than they do today, and where oceans now separate continents, grass grew thick across exposed plains that stretched for hundreds of miles. What follows is a quiet walk across those vanished lands, through the slow patience of ice and time, in the company of people who didn't know they were making history. They were just walking home. You're standing on ground that doesn't exist anymore, not metaphorically, not in some poetic sense. You're standing on actual earth, solid, cold, covered in low scrub and tough grass that will be underwater in a few thousand years. Right now, though, it's just land. Flat land. A lot of it. The kind of landscape that makes you understand why the word plain sounds so plain. This is Beringia. You won't find it on any modern map because it drowned a long time ago, but for now it connects what will eventually be called Asia to what will eventually be called North America. The Bering Land Bridge, some will call it later, though bridge makes it sound narrow and temporary, like something you'd hesitate to cross. This isn't a bridge. This is a subcontinent. At its widest, it stretches nearly 1,000 miles from north to south. You could walk across it for weeks and never see an ocean. The sky above you sits low and grey, the kind of overcast that makes it hard to tell what time of day it is. Late morning maybe, or early afternoon. The light doesn't change much this far north, especially not in autumn. Everything exists in a sort of perpetual dimness, like the sun is always thinking about setting but never quite commits to it. Your feet press into cold soil with each step. Not frozen, it's not quite winter yet. but cold enough that you can feel it through the worn leather of your boots. The grass crunches slightly as you walk. Some of it is already yellowing at the tips, preparing for the long freeze that's coming. In a few weeks, this whole plain will be locked under snow and ice until spring. But right now, it's just cold. Manageable cold. The kind you can walk through if you keep moving. And you are moving. You've been moving for days. Weeks, actually, though you stopped counting after the first month. Time works differently out here. It stretches and compresses in strange ways. A day of walking feels both endless and instantaneous. You look back at where you've been and can still see yesterday's campsite as a tiny dark smudge on the horizon. You look forward and see tomorrow's route already laid out in gentle undulations of grass and stone. There are others with you. Maybe 15 people in your group, maybe 20. The number fluctuates. Families join for a while, then split off to follow different game trails. Cousins appear from over a ridge, travel with you for a few days, then veer south toward better fishing. Nobody makes a big deal about it. People come and go like birds following invisible currents. Right now, though, it's just your family. Your parents, who are probably in their early 40s, though they'd find that number meaningless. Your younger sister, who keeps stopping to examine interesting rocks. Your uncle, who walks 100 yards ahead and occasionally signals back about what he's seeing. And you, somewhere in your late teens or early 20s, old enough to carry your share but young enough that your knees don't ache at the end of a long day. Not yet, anyway. The landscape around you is almost aggressively plain. Grass, more grass, occasional clusters of low shrubs, rocks that poke up through the soil like the earth is slowly exhaling stones. In the distance, very far to the west, you can make out the humped shapes of hills that might be mountains if you walk toward them for several days. You won't, though. You're heading east, or northeast. The direction doesn't have a name. It's just that way, toward where the reindeer tend to move in early winter. This is what most of human migration actually looked like. Not dramatic treks across dangerous territory, not desperate flights from disaster, just following food. Moving when the herds move, setting up camp when you find a good spot, staying there until the resources run low or the season changes, then moving again. It's not exciting. It's not particularly heroic. It's just what you do. The wind picks up slightly, carrying the smell of distant rain. Not here yet, but coming. Maybe tomorrow, maybe tonight. Hard to say. You adjust the hide draped over your shoulders and keep walking. The ground beneath your feet slopes very gently downward. You won't notice the descent until you look back in a few hours and realise how much elevation you've lost. That's how the land works out here. Everything happens gradually. The changes are so subtle that you don't see them happening. You only notice them after they've already happened. Behind you, somewhere back across hundreds of miles of grass and stone, is the place where your grandparents were born. Ahead of you, somewhere beyond the horizon, is the place where your grandchildren will live. You don't think about it in those terms. You're just walking, following the reindeer, looking for good campsites, trying to stay fed. But you are making history, very slowly, a few miles at a time. The archaeological evidence for all of this comes from scattered sites across Siberia, Alaska, and the now submerged continental shelf between them. Stone tools, fire pits, butchered bones, the remains of temporary camps that were occupied for a season or two, then abandoned as people moved on. Dating these sites is tricky. Organic material degrades, geological layers shift, and the ocean swallowed much of the most important evidence. But the picture that emerges is consistent. People were living in these northern regions by at least 15,000 years ago, probably earlier. They were hunting megafauna, mammoths, bison, wild horses. They were moving in small, flexible groups, and they were gradually, probably without realizing it, spreading east across a landscape that would eventually vanish beneath the sea. The thing is, they weren't discovering North America. That language implies intention. It suggests they knew there was a continent ahead of them and deliberately set out to find it. But that's not how it worked. Your family is just following game. If the reindeer move east, you move east. If they move west, you move west. Sometimes you encounter other families doing the same thing. Sometimes you see their old campsites, circles of stones where fires once burned, scattered bones from meals eaten weeks or months ago. Sometimes you meet them and exchange news. The fishing is good near the coast. The mammoths are moving south earlier than usual this year. There's a decent cave system about 8 days' walk to the northwest if you need to wait out a storm. Information travels slowly out here, but it does travel. Knowledge accumulates. Mental maps form. You know that if you keep going east, you'll eventually hit a range of mountains. You know that south of those mountains the terrain gets rockier. You know that certain valleys are good for late-season hunting. You don't know you're on a landmass that will eventually be called the Bering Land Bridge. You definitely don't know you're slowly walking into a continent that will eventually be called North America. You just know that the reindeer went this way, and so you're going this way too. Your sister has found another rock. She's holding it up to show your mother, who nods politely but doesn't stop walking. The rock looks like every other rock you've seen in the past 3 days, but your sister insists this one is different. It has a vein of white running through it. Your mother agrees that yes, it does have a vein of white running through it. Your sister adds the rock to her collection, which she carries in a small hide bag that's getting noticeably heavier. At some point, probably tonight when you make camp, your father will quietly suggest that maybe she doesn't need to keep every interesting rock she finds. Your sister will agree, examine her collection, remove the least interesting rocks, and then tomorrow she'll start collecting new ones. This has been the pattern for the entire journey. The sky continues its non-committal grey. The grass continues its gentle yellowing. You continue walking. After a while, an hour, maybe 2, your uncle signals from up ahead. He's found something. Everyone speeds up slightly, not running, just walking with a bit more purpose. When you reach him, he's standing at the edge of a wide, shallow gully, where water probably runs during spring melt. Right now it's dry, and carved into the exposed soil on one side are layers of different coloured earth. Dark brown, reddish clay, pale sandy soil. And jutting out from one of the middle layers, massive and unmistakable, is the curved tusk of a mammoth. Everyone stops to look at it. Your father climbs down into the gully to examine it more closely. It's old, very old. The bone is partially fossilised. This mammoth died long before any of you were born, long before your parents were born, maybe even before your grandparents. Time is hard to conceptualise in those terms. The past just is. Things happened before, and now they're done, and occasionally you find evidence of them weathering out of hillsides. Your mother wonders aloud if this is a good omen. Your father shrugs. Could be. Mammoths are valuable. Seeing a mammoth tusk, even an ancient one, might mean mammoths are nearby. Or it might mean nothing. Omens are complicated. Your uncle doesn't care about omens. He's already moved on, continuing east, and after a few minutes everyone follows. The tusk remains where it is, slowly eroding out of the soil. In another 1,000 years it'll weather free completely and fall to the bottom of the gully. In 10,000 years the entire area will be underwater. But for now, it's just a thing you saw once while walking east. You'll probably mention it tonight when you make camp. We saw an old mammoth tusk today, and then tomorrow you'll keep walking, and the tusk will fade into the general category of things we've seen, along with interesting rock formations and that weird frost pattern from last week, and the time your sister nearly stepped on a ground squirrel. The concept of the Bering Land Bridge was first seriously proposed in the early 20th century. Though indigenous peoples in the region had oral traditions about landscape changes that suggested they understood something significant had happened to the geography over deep time, the scientific evidence mounted slowly. Geologists studied sea level changes and calculated that during the last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago, global sea levels were perhaps 400 feet lower than today. That much water locked up in ice sheets meant that shallow areas of the ocean floor became dry land. The Bering Strait, which currently separates Asia from North America by about 55 miles of water, would have been a continuous landmass for thousands of years. Modern research has refined this picture considerably. Beringia wasn't just a narrow strip of land that people hurried across. It was a full ecosystem. Genetic studies of ancient plant material recovered from lake sediments show that the region supported grasslands and shrub tundra. Pollen analysis indicates diverse vegetation. Bone assemblages from archaeological sites demonstrate that megafauna, mammoths, horses, bison, caribou, lived and thrived here. This wasn't a barren ice bridge. It was a place where people lived. You don't know any of this historical context, of course. You're just walking through your normal world. But it's worth understanding what that world is. This isn't a temporary route between two places. This is home. Maybe not permanent home. Few places are truly permanent for people who follow migratory game, but home in the sense that it's familiar. You know these grasses. You know how to find water here. You know which animals to hunt and which to avoid. You know that in spring certain valleys fill with birds. You know that in autumn fish run up the streams in numbers that make catching them almost trivial. This is just life. Regular, ordinary life. And you're living it on ground that will be gone in a few thousand years. The sun, still hidden behind its perpetual grey blanket, begins to sink toward the horizon. The light shifts from ambiguous dimness to a more definite sort of evening. Your father starts looking for a good campsite. He's considering several factors simultaneously. Flat ground, obviously. Access to water. There's a small creek visible about half a mile to the north. Shelter from wind. Those low hills over there would work. Proximity to fuel. Driftwood is scarce out here, but there are dry shrubs and some animal dung that burns reasonably well. And though he wouldn't articulate it this way, a certain feeling about the place, a sense that it's safe, that predators don't frequent this particular spot, that the land here is neutral. He finds something that meets his criteria, a slight depression in the ground near a cluster of rocks that will block the worst of the wind. Everyone stops walking without needing to be told. The routine is automatic. Your mother and sister start gathering fuel. Your uncle begins arranging rocks for a fire pit. Your father unpacks the materials needed to actually start a fire, which involves a fire drill and bow and enough patience that you're always impressed when it works. Your job is to fetch water, so you head toward the creek with several high containers. The walk to the creek is quiet. Your footsteps make soft sounds in the grass. Somewhere far off, you hear a bird calling. Not a bird you recognize. The sound is high and slightly mournful. It calls 3 times, then stops. You reach the creek, which is exactly as advertised. Narrow, shallow, cold. The water runs clear over smooth stones. You fill the containers, which takes a few minutes. The water is so cold it makes your fingers ache. You're careful not to disturb the sediment at the bottom. Murky water is drinkable, but clear water is better. On the way back, you notice how the light has changed again. It's definitely evening now. The grey has deepened. Not dark yet, but getting there. By the time you return to camp, your father has a fire going. It's small. Fuel is too precious to waste on large fires, but adequate. The flames are orange and steady. Your mother is preparing food, which tonight consists of dried fish and some root vegetables someone dug up yesterday. Not a feast, but enough. You're hungry enough that it'll taste good. Everyone set it around the fire. For a while nobody talks. You eat slowly. The fish is salty and chewy. The roots are bland but filling. The fire makes small crackling sounds. Smoke rises and dissipates into the darkening sky. Your sister has taken out her rock collection and is arranging the stones in some pattern that makes sense to her. Your uncle is checking his spear, examining the point to make sure it's still secure. Your mother and father are just sitting, tired from a day of walking. This is most of life, really. Not the exciting parts that get remembered and passed down as stories. Just this. Sitting by a fire after a long day, eating food, resting, feeling the warmth on your face while the cold creeps up your back, watching smoke rise, existing. Eventually your father mentions the mammoth tusk. Your uncle makes a non-committal sound. Your mother says she thinks it means good hunting ahead. Your sister asks if mammoths have souls. Your father says he doesn't know. Probably. Most animals do. Your sister asks where the souls go when the animal dies. Your father says he doesn't know that either. Somewhere. The question doesn't seem to trouble him. There are lots of things nobody knows. The fire burns down gradually. Your father adds a few pieces of fuel, then declares that's enough for tonight. Too cold to let it die completely, but warm enough that it doesn't need much. Everyone prepares to sleep. This involves arranging hides, checking that everything is secure, making sure the fire won't spread, and then lying down on cold ground in positions that are never quite comfortable, but are familiar enough that you can sleep anyway. You lie on your back and look up at the sky. The clouds have thinned slightly. You can see a few stars, not many, just a handful of bright points in the grey-black darkness. You don't know their names. You know some patterns. Your father taught you to recognise certain arrangements that help with direction. But mostly they're just lights. Pretty, distant, indifferent. You close your eyes. The ground is hard beneath you. The fire makes small settling sounds. Someone near you is already snoring softly. The wind moves across the plain in a way that sounds almost like breathing. You're tired. Very tired. The kind of tired that comes from walking all day with a pack on your back. You sleep. Morning arrives not with sunrise but with gradual lightening. The sky shifts from black to dark grey to lighter grey. You wake when your father starts rebuilding the fire. Nobody says good morning. You just sit up, stretch, eat some leftover food from last night, and start preparing to walk again. The routine is efficient. Fire out, gear packed, a quick scan to make sure nothing is being left behind, and then you're walking again, heading east through the same type of landscape you walked through yesterday. Grass, stone, grey sky. The monotony is almost meditative. But the land is changing, though so slowly you barely notice. The grass is slightly shorter here. The soil is a bit sandier, and ahead, still distant but closer than yesterday, those mountains are becoming more defined. You can see snow on the peaks, not surprising. It's autumn, and you're far north. Snow comes early here. Over the next several days, or maybe it's a week, time blurs, you continue moving east. The weather stays cold and grey. You see a small herd of horses one afternoon far off to the south. Your uncle wants to track them, but your father thinks they're too distant to bother with. Better to keep moving. There will be other game. You pass several more old campsites. Circles of stones, scattered bones. In one place someone carved a simple design into a rock. Just lines and circles. No obvious meaning. Humans were here, and they left a mark, and now you're here looking at it. The mountains are getting closer. You're entering foothills now. The terrain is less flat, more varied. There are actual trees here, though not many. Scattered stands of stunted conifers clinging to rocky slopes. The vegetation is different too. More shrubs, less grass. The ground is rockier, which makes walking harder but also more interesting. You find yourself watching your feet more, choosing each step carefully. One afternoon, you reach a pass through the mountains. It's not dramatic. Just a natural gap where the terrain slopes gently upward, flattens out, then slopes down the other side. But standing at the top of the pass, you can see east for miles. And what you see is more land, more grass, more gentle hills rolling away toward a horizon that might as well be infinity. You're in Alaska now, though obviously you don't call it that. You don't call it anything. It's just land. More of the same land you've been walking through for weeks. But to someone looking at a map thousands of years in the future, this is significant. You've crossed from Asia into North America. You've migrated continents. You're part of one of the most important movements in human history. But right now, you're just thinking about finding a good place to camp before it gets dark. The archaeological record shows that humans reached the interior regions of Alaska by at least 14,000 years ago, possibly earlier. The evidence consists primarily of stone tools, projectile points, scrapers, blades, found at sites across the region. Some of these sites show repeated occupation, suggesting that people return to favourable locations seasonally. Other sites appear to have been used only once or twice, temporary camps, places where someone stopped for a night or two, then moved on. Dating early sites is complicated by several factors. Organic material like wood or bone degrades over time, especially in periglacial environments where freeze-thaw cycles destroy cellular structures. Sediment layers can be disturbed by natural processes, mixing older and younger materials. And the chaotic geology of previously glaciated landscapes means that stratigraphy, the layering of soil that archaeologists use to establish chronology, is often unreliable. Despite these challenges, a general picture has emerged. People were living in eastern Beringia during the late Pleistocene. They were hunting megafauna, they were making sophisticated stone tools, and they were gradually moving south and east, following game and exploring new territories. This wasn't a single migration event. It was an ongoing process that played out over thousands of years. Different groups moved at different times. Some stayed in the north, others pushed south. Population densities remained low, probably no more than a few thousand people scattered across hundreds of thousands of square miles. You camp that night on the eastern side of the pass. It's colder here. The wind has teeth. Your father manages to get a fire going, but it struggles against the breeze. Everyone huddles close. Your mother distributes more dried fish. Your sister has finally abandoned her rock collection, deeming it too heavy to carry over the mountains. She looks mildly sad about this, but pragmatic. The rocks will be fine without her. That night is harder than most. The cold is aggressive. You wake several times because your hip hurts from lying on rocky ground, or because the fire has died down and you need to feed it, or because the wind makes a sound like something crying. Nobody sleeps well. When morning finally arrives, everyone is tired and irritable. You eat quickly and start walking just to generate warmth. The next few days blur together into a sequence of cold, walking, making camp, sleeping poorly, and walking again. The landscape remains stubbornly similar. Grass, rocks, hills, occasional trees. You see more game now, caribou mostly, and once, very far off, what might be a mammoth. Your uncle gets excited about the mammoth, but it's too distant to pursue. By the time you could reach it, it would be long gone. So you watch it for a few minutes, a huge dark shape moving across a hillside, and then keep walking. Around this time, you start to notice that the land is different in subtle ways. The vegetation has changed. Different grasses, different shrubs. The rocks look different too. More volcanic stone, less limestone. The sky is still grey. You're beginning to think the sky might just be grey forever. But the quality of the greyness has shifted. It's harder to articulate. Just a feeling that you're somewhere new. Your father seems to sense it too. He's more cautious now. He scouts further ahead before committing to a direction. He checks the wind more frequently. At night, he's careful about the fire, making sure it's fully extinguished before everyone sleeps. You're in unfamiliar territory now. Not dangerous necessarily, just unknown. An unknown requires caution. You're also, though you don't realise it, moving into what will eventually be called Alaska's interior, the region between the Brooks Range to the north and the Alaska Range to the south. It's a vast landscape of boreal forest and tundra, cut through by wide rivers and dotted with thousands of lakes. 14,000 years ago it would have been colder and drier than it is today. Less forest, more grass, but still rich in game, and still home to small, scattered groups of humans who are figuring out how to live here. Genetic studies of modern indigenous populations in Alaska and northern Canada suggest that their ancestors have been in these regions for thousands of years. The genetic markers are distinct from both Asian and southern North American populations, indicating a long period of relative isolation. These populations adapted to their environment over millennia. developing specialised knowledge about local ecology, sophisticated hunting strategies, and cultural practices suited to life in the far north. You don't think about any of this in genetic terms, obviously, but you are aware that your family has knowledge. Your father knows how to track caribou across different types of terrain. Your mother knows which plants are edible and which will make you sick. Your uncle knows how to read the weather by watching the sky and feeling the wind. Your sister is learning all of this slowly, by watching and listening and occasionally asking questions. Knowledge accumulates. It's passed down, not through writing. You don't have writing, but through demonstration and practice and story. One morning your father wakes everyone earlier than usual. He's found something. Everyone gets up quickly, curious. He leads you about half a mile north to where a stream cuts through a rocky hillside, and there, weathering out of the stream bank, are bones, many bones, all from the same animal, judging by their size and proximity. Your father thinks it's a bison, a large one, and the bones aren't ancient. They're maybe a year or two old, still relatively fresh, which means this is good hunting territory. Your uncle examines the bones carefully. He agrees with your father's assessment. This area has game, the stream has water, the hills provide some shelter. This is a good place to stay for a while, so you stop walking. Stopping doesn't mean sitting still. It means establishing a more permanent camp. Your family finds a good location, a south-facing slope where the sun, when it occasionally appears, provides some warmth. There's an overhang of rock that creates a natural shelter. The stream is close. Firewood is available. Over the next several days, everyone works to make the camp more comfortable. Your father and uncle construct a windbreak using branches and hides. Your mother sets up a dedicated area for food preparation. Your sister, freed from the tyranny of daily walking, immediately resumes collecting rocks. This camp will be home for the next few weeks, maybe months. It depends on the game. If hunting stays good, you'll stay. If the herds move on, you'll follow. But for now, this is it. Your small piece of the world. Life in a more permanent camp has a different rhythm than life on the move. There's time for maintenance. Your father spends several days working on tools, resharpening blades, replacing broken hafts. Your mother processes hides, scraping them clean and working them until they're supple. Your uncle goes out hunting every few days and returns with caribou or smaller game. You help with everything, fetching water, gathering fuel, assisting with butchering and food preparation. The weather turns properly cold. Snow begins to fall, not constantly, just occasional flurries that dust the ground white and then melt away. But the message is clear. Winter is coming. Your family prepares. More hides are processed. More food is dried and stored. The windbreak is reinforced. Everyone accepts that the next few months will be hard. That's just what winter is. One night, sitting by the fire, your father tells a story. Not a new story. You've heard it before. But stories get repeated, and that's how they're remembered. It's about a hunter who tracked a great elk for 7 days across mountains and valleys. The elk was clever. It doubled back on its trail, crossed streams to hide its scent, and travelled through terrain where following was almost impossible. But the hunter was patient. He didn't rush. He just kept following, and eventually, after 7 days, the elk grew tired. It stopped in a valley and rested, and the hunter caught up to it and made his kill. The story is about patience, about persistence, about understanding that success doesn't come from speed or force, but from simply not giving up. Your father doesn't explain this. The story explains itself. Everyone listens. The fire crackles. Outside the shelter, snow is beginning to fall again. You think about the story later, after the fire has burned down and everyone is asleep. You think about patience, about how your family has been walking for months, not really toward anything specific, just following game and good weather, and a sense that east is better than west. How you've covered hundreds of miles without ever hurrying. How you're now camped in a place that might as well be nowhere, or might as well be everywhere, depending on how you think about it. Tomorrow your uncle will go hunting again. Your father will continue working on tools. Your mother will check the food supplies. Your sister will add rocks to her collection. life will continue in its slow, steady way. And somewhere far to the south, distances so vast you can't comprehend them, other families are doing the same thing, walking, hunting, setting up camps, surviving. None of you know that you're part of something larger, that these small movements, multiplied across thousands of families over thousands of years, will result in 2 entire continents being populated, that your descendants will build cities and civilizations, that archaeologists will dig up your campsites and try to piece together what your life was like. You're just living, following the game, trying to stay warm, looking at stars on clear nights and wondering what they are. That's enough. Winter settles in properly. The snow doesn't melt anymore. It accumulates. The landscape transforms into white and grey. The mountains in the distance become indistinct, just pale shapes against a pale sky. The stream freezes, though your father knows where to chop through the ice to reach water underneath. Game becomes harder to find. The caribou have moved to lower elevations. The smaller animals have burrowed into the ground or migrated elsewhere. Your family survives on stored food and occasional hunting success. Your uncle manages to bring down a caribou one afternoon. Pure luck, he insists, though everyone knows he's being modest. The caribou wandered close to camp, and he was ready. The meat will last for weeks if it's rationed carefully. Everyone thanks him in quiet, matter-of-fact ways. Good work. We needed that. He accepts the thanks with a shrug. The days are short now. Light arrives late and leaves early. Most of your time is spent in the shelter, huddled around the fire trying to stay warm. Boredom becomes a factor. There's only so much tool maintenance you can do, only so many hides to process. Your sister has exhausted the local supply of interesting rocks. Your mother tells stories to pass the time. Your father carves small figures from wood, animals mostly. He's not particularly skilled at it, but it gives his hands something to do. You think about time a lot during winter, how it moves so slowly when you're cold and bored, how a day feels like a week, how weeks blur together because every day is the same. Grey light, cold, hunger that's not quite starvation, but is always present, waiting for spring. But winter doesn't last forever. Eventually, imperceptibly at first, the days start getting longer. The snow begins to thin. The temperature rises just enough that your breath doesn't fog quite as dramatically. And one morning you hear a bird. Just one. A high, chirping call. It's the first bird sound you've heard in months. Everyone stops to listen. Your mother smiles. Spring is coming. Over the next several weeks, the transformation accelerates. More birds arrive. The stream thaws. Patches of brown earth appear through the snow, and the game returns. First in small groups, then in larger herds. Caribou moving north. Bison grazing on the exposed grass. Your uncle goes hunting and returns successful more often than not. Food becomes abundant again. Your family starts preparing to move. The camp has served its purpose. You survived winter. Now it's time to follow the herds again. The shelter is dismantled carefully. Useful materials are packed. Perishable items are left behind. The fire is extinguished completely. After a few hours of work, it's as if you were never there. Just a flattened area of ground and some scattered rocks. In a few years, even those signs will fade. You resume walking. East and slightly south this time, following a river valley that cuts through the landscape. The walking feels easier after months of sitting still. Your body remembers the rhythm. Your legs remember the distance. The pack on your back, which felt unbearably heavy that first day, now just feels normal. The land continues changing. More trees now. Actual forests in some places. The rivers are wider. The valleys deeper. You're moving into interior Alaska, though you don't know that's what it's called. You just know the terrain is different, richer somehow, more varied, more alive. One afternoon you see smoke in the distance, just a thin column rising above the trees. Your father signals everyone to stop. Smoke means fire, fire means people, and people can be friendly or unfriendly. Your father decides to investigate, but cautiously. Your family approaches slowly, making noise so the other group knows you're coming. Surprising people is rude at best and dangerous at worst. The other group turns out to be friendly. Another family, roughly the same size as yours. They speak a language that's similar enough to yours that basic communication works. You're from the west, they're from the south. Everyone exchanges information. The hunting is good along this river. There's a good crossing point about 2 days east. A large herd of bison was spotted a week ago heading northeast. You camp together that night. The two fires merge into one. Food is shared. Your sister compares rocks with one of their children. The adults trade stories and information. You learn that these people have been in this region for several generations. Their grandparents walked here from somewhere far to the south. They know the land well. They tell your father about good hunting grounds and places to avoid. In the morning, the two groups part ways, friendly but not particularly sentimental about it. You'll probably never see these people again. That's just how it works. You exchange goodbyes and good wishes and head in different directions, but information has been exchanged. Your mental map has expanded. You now know things about the region ahead that you didn't know yesterday. This is how knowledge spreads. Slowly. Through chance meetings and shared stories. No books, no maps. Just people talking to each other by firelight and remembering what they're told. Over the following months, your family continues moving through interior Alaska. The landscape varies. Sometimes dense forest, sometimes open tundra, sometimes rocky highlands, sometimes river valleys thick with vegetation. The weather remains unpredictable. Cold mornings and warm afternoons, sudden rain, occasional snow, even in summer. You adapt. You always adapt. You see more people now, not frequently, but occasionally. Other families following game. Small groups camped by good fishing spots. Once, a very large gathering, maybe 50 people, all assembled near a river where salmon are running in huge numbers. Your family joins them for a few days. The fishing is absurdly good. You catch more fish than you can eat. Everyone does. The excess is dried and smoked for later. The gathering is temporary. Once the salmon run ends, people disperse. But during those few days, there's a sense of community. Stories are shared. Knowledge is exchanged. Young people look at each other with interest. Relationships form. Not everyone is family, but there's a sense that everyone is connected in some broader way. The same people, the same challenges, the same understanding of how to live in this landscape. You leave the gathering with more food than you arrived with, plus information about the region to the south, which several people recommend as good winter territory. Your family considers this information. Winter is still months away, but it's worth thinking about. The archaeological evidence for this period, roughly 13 to 12,000 years ago, shows increased population density in interior Alaska. More sites, more widespread distribution. Genetic data suggest that populations were growing and diversifying. Different groups were developing distinct cultural practices and technologies adapted to their specific environments. But none of this would have been obvious to you at the time. You're just living your life, following game, meeting people occasionally, moving through seasons. The idea that you're part of some larger demographic trend would be incomprehensible. You're just you. Your family is just your family, and the world is just the world. One day, late in summer, you reach a high point in the landscape, a ridge that overlooks a vast valley stretching out below. The valley is green and lush. A wide river meanders through it. Forests cluster along the riverbanks. In the distance, more mountains rise against the horizon. Your father stands looking at the valley for a long time. Your mother joins him. They don't say much, just look. Eventually your father says that this seems like a good place. Your mother agrees. Your uncle nods. Your sister's already scrambling down the ridge, excited to explore new territory. You follow. The descent takes several hours. By the time you reach the valley floor, the sun is setting. The light turns golden. The river reflects the sky. Everything feels peaceful, abundant, safe. You make camp near the river, The ground is soft, the grass is thick. The sound of water moving over rocks is soothing. Your father gets a fire going easily. Plenty of dry wood here. Your mother prepares food. Your uncle scouts the immediate area and reports that game trails are everywhere. This is good territory. That night, lying by the fire, you think about all the places you've been. The wide plains of Beringia, the mountain passes, the cold camps where you survived winter, the river valleys, the forests, all those miles, all those days of walking. And now you're here, in a place that feels for the moment like it could be home. Not permanent home, probably. Your family will move again when the seasons change or the game moves on. But for now, this is it. This valley, this river, this sky full of stars that you still don't know the names of. Far to the west, back across hundreds of miles, the land you walked across is slowly changing. Sea levels are rising. Beringia is shrinking. The land bridge that connected Asia to North America is growing narrower. In another 1,000 years it will be gone entirely, drowned beneath the Bering Strait. But you don't know that. You don't know that the route you walked is closing behind you, that future generations won't be able to follow the same path. You just know that you're here, in this valley, in this moment, with your family, and that's enough. The fire burns low, the stars wheel overhead, the river makes its endless sound. You close your eyes and sleep, dreamless and deep, the sleep of someone who walked a very long way and finally stopped moving. Years pass, seasons cycle. Your family stays in the valley for longer than usual. The hunting remains good. The river provides fish. The forest provides fuel and shelter. It's as close to permanent as anything in your life has been. Your sister, no longer so young, starts her own family. Children are born. Your parents grow older. The lines in their faces deepen. Their hair greys. Your uncle's knees start bothering him on cold mornings. Everyone adapts to these changes without much comment. This is life. People age. Families grow. The world continues turning. You're older now too. Middle-aged, if that's a term that would mean anything to you. You have your own children. You teach them the things your father taught you. How to track game. How to read the weather. How to make fire and tools and shelter. How to be patient. How to keep walking when walking is all that's left. One autumn, your family decides to move south. The winters here are getting harder, or maybe your parents are just getting older and feel the cold more acutely. Either way, south seems better, warmer, easier, so you walk again. Not as far this time, not as fast. Your parents can't manage the long days of walking they once could. You take it slowly, rest often, make camp earlier. The journey that might have taken 2 weeks in your youth takes nearly 2 months. But you make it. You reach a region of foothills where the climate is milder and the winters less brutal. You make a new camp, another valley, another river, different but similar. The pattern repeats because the pattern works. Your father dies that winter, not dramatically, just old age. He goes to sleep one night and doesn't wake up. Your mother grieves quietly. Your uncle helps dig the burial. Your sister sings something soft and wordless. You feel the loss, but not as a shock. He was old. This was always going to happen. That doesn't make it easier, but it makes it understandable. Spring comes again. Life continues. Your children are growing. They're starting to push for more independence, wanting to explore, wanting to know what's beyond the next ridge. You recognize the impulse. You felt it too once. You tell them what your father told you. Be patient, be careful, pay attention to the land. It'll teach you what you need to know. Some of them listen, some don't. That's also part of life. The archaeological record for this period becomes richer. More sites, more artifacts, better preservation. Researchers have found evidence of camps scattered across Western Canada and the northern United States dating to around 12,000 years ago. These sites show increasing sophistication in tool technology. The famous Clovis points, distinctive spear points with fluted bases, appear in the record. Other stone tool traditions emerge and spread. Bone tools become more common. Art objects appear, though rarely. The genetic evidence becomes interesting here too. Studies of modern indigenous populations show that most people in the Americas trace their primary ancestry to populations that entered the continent during this period. There are some complexities, later waves of migration, regional adaptations, genetic drift, but the basic picture holds. The people walking through Alaska and northwestern Canada 12,000 years ago were the ancestors of hundreds of millions of people living today. You don't know this. You can't. You don't even know that you have descendants in any meaningful way. You know you have children, and they'll probably have children, but the idea that your bloodline will spread across 2 continents and persist for hundreds of generations is literally unimaginable. You're just living, trying to stay fed, trying to stay warm, teaching your children what you know. One day, decades after you first arrived in this region, you climb to a high point overlooking your valley. It's a clear day. Rare. The sky is actually blue instead of grey. You can see for miles. Mountains in every direction. Forests. Rivers. The land stretches out impossibly vast and impossibly empty. But you know it's not empty. There are people out there. Small groups. Scattered families. All doing the same thing you're doing. Surviving. Adapting. Learning. Moving slowly through the landscape. You've met some of them, exchanged stories, shared fires, and you know there are many more you'll never meet. You think about your father, about all those miles you walked together, about sitting by fires and listening to his stories, about learning to track and hunt and survive. He's gone now, but what he taught you isn't. You're teaching it to your children. They'll teach it to theirs. Knowledge persists. You think about the land too, how much of it there is, how little you've seen despite walking for most of your life, how there's always more beyond the next ridge, always more valleys, more rivers, more mountains. The land doesn't end, it just keeps going. You stay on the ridge for a while. The sun moves across the sky, the light shifts. Eventually you head back down to camp. Your family is there, your mother, now very old, sitting by the fire. Your sister cooking something, your children playing, your grandchildren watching everything with wide, curious eyes. This is life, this moment, this place. You don't need it to mean anything more than that. The story could end here, with you on that ridge, with your family in the valley below, with the understanding that life continues generation after generation in these quiet, steady rhythms. But the land has its own story, and that story is about loss. Far to the northwest, Beringia is drowning. The glaciers that locked up so much water during the Ice Age are melting, slowly at first, then faster. Sea levels rise. The land bridge that connected Asia to North America grows narrower. Rivers flood. Coastlines retreat inland. Entire ecosystems shift. The people living in Beringia notice these changes over generations. The shore is closer than grandparents remember. The islands that used to be connected are now separated by water. The hunting grounds near the coast are gone, reclaimed by the sea. Some families move inland, following the land as it retreats. Others adapt to coastal living, becoming experts at fishing and sea mammal hunting. But the land itself, the broad grassy plains where mammoths roamed and caribou migrated, is disappearing. By 10,000 years ago, Beringia is mostly gone. Only the highest elevations remain above water. What was once a vast landmass stretching hundreds of miles has been reduced to a narrow strait between 2 continents. The connection is severed. The route is closed. The people who used that route don't know they were the last ones. How could they? They were just living their lives, following game, raising families, moving through the landscape the way their ancestors had for thousands of years. And then, without anyone declaring it or marking the moment, the possibility ended. The modern Bering Strait is about 55 miles wide. The water is cold and dangerous. The currents are treacherous. It's possible to cross. People have done it, both in historical times and prehistorically using boats. but it's not easy. It's not the kind of thing you can do by accident while following caribou. The drowned landscape of Beringia remains on the ocean floor. Sediment cores pulled from the seafloor contain pollen and plant material from grasslands that thrived 15,000 years ago. Underwater surveys have identified features that suggest human activity, though confirming this is difficult given the depth and conditions. Future technology might allow archaeological exploration of these submerged landscapes. For now, they remain mostly inaccessible, a lost world. You don't witness any of this. You're long dead by the time Beringia finally drowns, but your descendants live through it. They watch the coastline change. They tell stories about land that used to exist but doesn't anymore, and eventually those stories fade. The land is forgotten. It becomes legend, then myth, then nothing. Just water where there used to be ground. But the journey doesn't stop. People keep moving. Your descendants spread south and east. Some follow river valleys down into what will become Canada and the United States. Others move along coastal routes. Some stay in the far north, adapting to Arctic conditions. Populations diversify. Languages develop. Different groups develop different technologies, different cultures, different ways of understanding the world. By 9,000 years ago, people have reached the southern tip of South America. An entire hemisphere has been populated. Thousands of miles, hundreds of generations, all descending from those small groups who walked across Beringia when it was still dry land. None of them know they're connected. The family living in Patagonia has no idea they share ancestors with the family living in Alaska. Too much time, too much distance. But the genetic evidence shows the relationship clearly. They're family, very distant family, but family nonetheless. The land remembers in its way. Archaeological sites scattered across 2 continents mark where people stopped, rested, lived, and moved on. Stone tools buried in ancient sediment, fire pits filled with charcoal, bones from butchered animals, human remains occasionally reverently buried with care. All of it evidence of lives lived quietly, of families surviving, of people doing the best they could with what they had. None of it was heroic in the traditional sense. No one was conquering anything. No one was on a grand adventure. They were just living, following food, staying warm, teaching their children, walking when walking made sense and stopping when it didn't. But cumulatively it was enormous. It was the peopling of 2 continents. It was one of the largest migrations in human history. And it happened so slowly, so gradually, that no one involved would have recognized it as history at all. Just life. Regular, ordinary, difficult, beautiful life. The valley where you lived is still there. The river still runs through it. The mountains still rise against the horizon. The grass still grows thick in summer and dies back in winter. But you're not there anymore. Your family moved on, or died out, or merged with other families until the specific line that was you became diluted into the broader population. Your tools, if they survived, are buried now, under soil and vegetation and time. Maybe an archaeologist will find them someday. Maybe not. It doesn't particularly matter. They were tools. You made them. You used them. They served their purpose. Your children's children's children spread across the land. Some became farmers eventually in regions where farming made sense. Others remained hunters and fishers. Some built large communities and complex societies. Others stayed in small mobile groups. All valid. All different ways of being human. The land that drowned remains drowned. Beringia is gone. The route is closed. But the memory persists in strange ways. In genetic markers. In archaeological evidence. In stories that survived in oral tradition for thousands of years before finally being written down. Modern researchers study these migrations with sophisticated tools. Genetic analysis, computer modelling, linguistic reconstruction, archaeological survey. They build complex narratives about population movements and adaptation and cultural change, all of it based on fragments, broken tools, scattered bones, pollen trapped in lake sediments. They try to understand what it was like, what you experienced, how it felt to walk across Beringia, to survive winters in interior Alaska, to raise children in valleys that now bear names you never knew. They do their best. They're careful. They acknowledge uncertainty. They revise their theories when new evidence emerges, but they can never fully capture it, because it wasn't a grand narrative. It wasn't a story with a beginning, middle, and end. It was just life. Thousands of people living thousands of small lives, making thousands of small decisions, trying to find food, trying to stay safe, trying to understand the world around them. And somehow, cumulatively, changing everything. The night is deep now. Wherever you are, reading this, listening to this, the world outside has grown quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes late, when most people are asleep and the day's noise has finally faded. Think about that valley again, the one where you made camp after walking for months, the river reflecting stars, the grass moving in a wind that travelled across miles of empty land before reaching you, the fire burning low, your family sleeping nearby. Think about the patience it took to live that life, to walk for weeks without knowing exactly where you were going, to survive winters that seemed endless, to keep moving when moving was hard, to teach your children skills they'd need decades in the future, to trust that tomorrow would come and that you'd figure out how to survive it when it did. Think about the land that's gone now, the grasslands that stretch between continents, the mammoths that no longer exist, the routes that closed, the possibilities that ended, all of it swallowed by rising water and time. But think about what persists too, the genetic legacy, the archaeological evidence, the descendants who filled 2 continents, the knowledge that was passed down, generation after generation, until it became the foundation of hundreds of different cultures. You were there, in this thought experiment, this gentle fiction. You walked those miles, you felt that cold, you sat by those fires, and now you're here, safe, warm, lying down, breathing slowly, letting the story fade into the background as sleep creeps closer. The land is still there, changed, but there. The rivers still flow, the mountains still stand, the grass still grows in summer, and people still walk across these landscapes, though now they have maps and roads and names for everything. But the fundamental experience remains the same, putting one foot in front of the other, moving through space and time, looking at horizons, wondering what's beyond the next ridge, trying to understand your place in the vastness. That hasn't changed. Not really. Beringia is gone. The route is closed. The land bridge is underwater. But the journey continues, in different forms, in different ways. People still move, still adapt, still teach their children, still look at stars and wonder. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the story doesn't need a dramatic ending. Maybe it just needs to acknowledge that life continues, that people persist, that the world keeps turning, and we keep walking through it, trying to figure it out as we go. The fire burns down to coals, the stars wheel overhead, the wind moves across the grass in its endless way, and somewhere, far away, the ocean laps against shores that used to be land, covering history, hiding evidence, but not erasing what happened. You were there, you walked that path, and now you're here, tired, ready to rest, the journey complete, at least for tonight. Sleep comes slowly, gently, like water rising, like snow falling, like time passing. The land remembers, you remember, and that's enough. Rest now. The walking is done. The story is told. Everything that needed to be said has been said. The grass is still growing somewhere. The rivers are still flowing. The land continues its slow changes, indifferent and eternal, and you're safe here. Far from that cold, far from that distance, just here, just now, just breathing, sleep, or just